Joining the conversation, not one, but two Pulitzer Prize winners, Washington Post White House reporter, my friend Ashley Parker, and syndicated columnist George Will. George is also the author of the new book, The Conservative Sensibility. Chris Wilson with us, CEO of WPA Intelligence and a Republican pollster, and my dearest friend, Eddie Glaude, a professor at Princeton University. Madame Parker, to you first. The president tweeted recently that if migrants don't like the conditions, don't come. Is this a deterrent strategy? If you don't like it here, stay where you're from?
It's everything. Part of what the president and some people in his administration do say is, yes, this is about deterrence, that the undocumented immigrants who come here are breaking the law simply by entering, and that it shouldn't be hospitable for them to come. And this is about deterrent. And they point correctly that there is a crisis on the border that needs to be solved. But it is also, in sort of more large part, as Kelly said, a political issue. This is something that whether the president actually, he's been threatening these ICE raids for a while. We have to wait and see what he does. But whether he does them or not, these threats, this hardline rhetoric, this kind of red meat, this anti-immigrant sentiment from him is fantastic for him to churn up his base ahead of the 2020 elections. And this is what he wants to do. So whether or not he even achieves his goals and sort of takes these actions, keep in mind, he hasn't even built that wall on the southern border. But talking about it and being tough sort of helps him try to demonstrate to his base that he is a fighter and this is an issue that he cares about.
Chris, does it help the president politically? Because the president's base, for the most part, is bulletproof. They're going to stick with him no matter what. And he needs and wants to expand that base if he's going to get reelected again. So taking this hardline approach, is it a winning move for him? Unnerving the immigrant community doesn't matter to him. He's focused on voters, voters, voters.
He is, and I think your point is exactly right in the fact that his base is pretty much ginned up no matter what. I don't think he has to do much more on this issue or many other issues for the purposes of getting them excited about him and turning out to vote for him. I do think, to the overall point, though, you have to recognize that there is the crisis and the conditions in which they're living under have got to be done. Something's going to be done about it. You look at just McAllen, Texas Center for Border Patrol. In the past year has apprehended 264,000 people coming across the border. That's double the population of McAllen. So it is not sustainable from a standpoint of allowing them all to stay there. And what Ken Cuccinelli was talking about, they've gone through the system, they've applied for asylum, they have not received it for whatever reason. And one of those reasons is loopholes created by Congress. To give you one example there, in 2014, 1% of the single men coming across the border had children with them. 1%. Last year, 50% of single men had children with them. What you have is people who are now gaming the system for the purposes of being able to stay in the country. And I think that is what is creating the crisis right now, that we've got to close those loopholes.
So it's people gaming the system. It's not a crisis in the Northern Triangle. It's not failing governments, lack of jobs, and gang violence.
And it's our economy here, too, that's pulling them in. All of those things factor into it. But you've got to fix parts of it, all of it together holistically. The other thing I'll point out is one of the things that Democrat State Representative Canales from Texas asked last week to the DHS is, what do we do if my people want to help? And they said there's no system for them to receive private donations. So if you or I want to send diapers or food or toothbrushes or toothpaste, we can't do that. That's a simple law that can be changed that could allow every person in America who is disturbed by this to take action today.
You want to respond, Eddie?
No, I just think the policy is cruel. I think his point is cruelty. When we talk about deterrence, if you don't like it, stay where you are. I think the policy at its heart is immoral. It seems to me, when you combine that with, let me say this, when you combine that, Stephanie, with an announcement of ICE raids, and what that means for folk who live in communities, children whose fathers and mothers and aunts and uncles are undocumented, and what that sends through that community, right? The whole idea is fear, and it's cruel. And it seems to me that it runs counter to the best of who we take ourselves to be. And instead, it becomes, in some ways, a billboard for who we actually are, right? America traffics in cruelty. I'm tired of giving the Trump administration the benefit of the doubt. When we think about their immigration policy, it is rooted in a deep insecurity about the demographic shifts in this country, and they're acting on it at a level that should be alarming to anybody who's committed to the ideal of who Americans take themselves to be.
George Will, weigh in on this for us. Chris was saying what we need to do is have Congress act and close some loopholes. But given how divided things are right now, is there a snowball's chance in hell you're going to see any bipartisanship?
I'd bet on hell, not the snowball. 7 years ago, actually 6 years ago, in 2013, there was the Gang of Eight immigration bill. Comprehensive reform. That is, they were going to solve everything all at once. The bill was 1,197 pages long, and it went nowhere because we do not do comprehensive gracefully in the Congress. The president may be ginning up his base, but no one, and I mean no one, ever won the presidency with his base alone. So the question is, what would be the ancillary effects of, say, a massive enforcement measures of 1 million people rounded up? I don't think the American people have any idea what the film and the video on the newscast would look like for police measures necessary to extract 1 out of 11. That's what we're talking about for 1 million people. Only 1 out of the 11 of the illegal immigrants in this country. I think that would add to what I think is a pervasive feeling of national embarrassment as it already is.
Chris, who do these raids work for? Is it for President Trump's voters who are saying there are too many people here who are using our resources and going to our schools? Because last I checked, we've got 6 million open jobs in this country, specifically for low or no skilled workers, where if you talk to small and large businesses, they're saying we're dying for workers. It helps our economy to have them.
Well, I think to your original question about what is causing the mass immigration. And
that's not what I asked. I said, why would the president go out? The raids, who does this serve? Who is saying to the president, yes, this is the right thing to do for our country, besides just the make America great again, put us first? No, let's go technically. Who do these raids serve?
If you have 1 billion people that Ken Cuccinelli talked about have gone through the process of applying for asylum and have been denied that asylum.
I'm not talking about them.
But that's who it works for. The purpose is to remove them from the country because they have not come through the system legally. And that is what the message is being sent, is that if you want to come to the United States, you need to do it legally. You can't do it just by finding some kid that you can traffic across the border and
Chris,
be able to
that's
leave
an
them there.
overstatement.
It's not an overstatement.
Simply not
1%
just find some kid and cross the border with them. Come on now.
That's an overstatement. Half of the single men coming across the border have a child with them. You're telling me it's increased by 49%?
It's a false attribution of causality. You're trying to say that the reason why they're migrating is because they're just taking kids to use that as an excuse to enter the country.
No, they're using it to get across. They're trying to get across.
It could very well be the case that the crisis in the northern triangle is generating it. So the way in which you're putting it is to create a kind of causal line between, let me take advantage of this kid in order to get into the country. That's the problem. If you look at it that way, then your heart doesn't open. If you look at it in another way, that there's a crisis, then you begin to respond to it.
There's 144,000 people a month. That would be over 2 million in a year that would be apprehended.
But they're human beings,
they are okay, and they're being. And what do you do with them?
What do you do with them? You open your heart.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's what I just suggested. We should be able to do something about it, and we're not being allowed to do that by Congress. And that's a very simple change that could be made.
But instead, you put them in detention centers where they get scabies, chicken pox, where they get flu, they die. What does that mean? That's who we are?
George Will, to that point, it's not like we're not spending the money. We're spending billions of dollars at the border, yet the living conditions are deplorable. Where's the disconnect? It's, a hardline immigration person might say, well, spend the money on the American people. We're spending the money. Why isn't it actually going anywhere useful?
Well, it's very hard to deal with massive flows of populations on this scale. No one does it gracefully. They didn't do it in Europe. They've sort of offloaded the problem to Turkey now, saying, you solve the problem for us. No society has yet figured out how to handle this. Every society knows the control of the borders is an essential attribute of national sovereignty. You're quite right when you said a moment ago that we have 6 million unfilled jobs in the United States and people clamoring to get in to go to work. That doesn't quite answer the question, though, of whether or not the kind of people who are coming here now are the kind of people we need. 10,000 baby boomers retire every day into the Medicare Social Security retirement system. And what that means is that we need to replenish the workforce. So we need immigrants as much as the immigrants need the United States. But before we can do that, we have to control a human rights crisis that simply we do not know how to handle gracefully.
My goodness, it's obviously a very, very complicated problem. Ashley Parker, thank you very much. Gentlemen, stick around. We have more to cover. Next.